the Christmas broadcast that never ended. A Miss Marple mystery. Welcome to Hidden Clue, a gentle corner of the world where stories unfold slowly like snow settling over a quiet village. Tonight we share a tale that mingles warmth, curiosity, and the soft glow of holiday lights. Tell me, where are you listening from this evening? Perhaps curled up by a fire or sipping tea as snow drifts outside. I love imagining each of you in your own little nook, part of this shared journey through mystery. Picture St. Mary Mead on Christmas Eve, rooftops dusted with fresh snow, lanterns casting golden halos along cobbled lanes, and the faint scent of pine and roasting chestnuts in the air. From the distant radio, a familiar carol drifts. Yet something is slightly off. A note lingers too long, a voice joins where it shouldn't, and the broadcast, intended to end at midnight, simply continues. Who could have orchestrated this subtle disruption, and why does it feel as if the village itself is holding its breath? If you enjoy calm, clever mysteries, subscribe and join the Hidden Clue family. Now pour yourself a cup of tea, settle in by the fire, and let's step quietly into tonight's mystery. Chapter 1. The Village Listens. The evening air in St. Mary Mead carried a crispness that hinted at the coming snowfall, delicate enough to settle softly on rooftops without disturbing the quiet bustle of the village. Miss Marple walked slowly along the narrow lane, her gloved hands clasped in front of her, taking in the familiar sights she had known for decades. Each window glowed warmly, the flicker of candlelight reflecting on frost-tipped panes, and the occasional wisp of smoke from chimneys painted a comforting picture of domestic calm. She exchanged polite nods and gentle greetings with neighbours, each familiar face smiling, with a mixture of anticipation and routine cheer. It was Christmas Eve, and the village seemed to vibrate with a quiet, expectant excitement, the kind that could only be felt when the year drew to a close and everyone allowed themselves a moment to savour tradition. As she strolled past the bookshop, she paused to admire the small decorations hung with meticulous care, sprigs of holly and crimson ribbons framing the display of leather-bound volumes. Mr. Pennyworth, the owner, emerged to tip his hat, recalling fondly the broadcast of last year, when a particularly merry song had prompted an impromptu carol along the cobbled street. Miss Marple smiled, sharing a brief anecdote of her own, how she had once heard a note in the same broadcast that sounded strangely like a warning to an absent friend. She tucked the memory away quietly, noting it only for herself, as her keen eyes wandered toward the lampposts, one of which flickered erratically, sending shadows dancing across the snow-dusted stones at the corner, near the village square. A few children, cheeks rosy and voices soft, played around the fountain, their laughter ringing lightly in the evening air. Villagers paused in passing to share stories of previous Christmas Eves, each tale woven with humour and nostalgia. One spoke of the year the radio broadcast had been interrupted by a brief, mysterious static that had left the community in gentle suspense, though no harm had come of it. Another recounted the excitement of discovering a long-lost carol hidden within a recording, a detail that had brought quiet delight to attentive listeners. Miss Marple noted these anecdotes carefully, mentally cataloguing each as a puzzle piece, subtle though it seemed, for the patterns of human behaviour often revealed themselves in small, ordinary moments. Her gaze lingered briefly on the empty doorway of Mrs. Fletcher's cottage, where the familiar warm glow was absent. The neighbour, known for her steadfast attendance at every village gathering, had yet to appear, and while Miss Marple said nothing aloud, her curiosity quietly sharpened. She continued her gentle promenade, feeling the soft crunch of snow beneath her shoes, and allowed herself a small smile at the reassuring sense of community that enveloped the streets. Yet beneath the comforting sounds and the cheerful lights, there was a hint of subtle irregularity, a whisper of the unusual hiding within the ordinary. Even the simplest interactions, she reflected, could conceal the most telling details. A passerby's quick glance, the hurried repositioning of a wreath, a murmur about a neighbour's absence, all held the potential to reveal a story unseen by most eyes. It was in these understated observations that Miss Marple found her delight, and indeed her purpose. As she approached the centre of the village, where the lanterns burned brightest and the chatter was warmest, she allowed herself to soak in the festive atmosphere, fully aware that what appeared ordinary tonight might soon unfold into something entirely different. The evening, serene and familiar, held a promise, one only the most attentive would notice, that beneath the laughter, the shared memories, and the twinkling lights, subtle hints were waiting. A careful observer might detect them in the rhythm of conversation, in the almost imperceptible tension among villagers, or in the flicker of a solitary lantern. Miss Marple, as always, was ready to see what others overlooked, prepared to follow the gentle threads of curiosity that could lead her to discoveries both delightful and unexpected. As the evening deepened, Miss Marple noticed a subtle shift in the village's atmosphere. The familiar hum of Christmas chatter seemed slightly interrupted, as if the usual cadence of conversation had taken an unexpected pause. From the windows of the community hall, soft strains of music drifted into the street, longer than she remembered any piece ever playing during the broadcast. It was cheerful enough, yet stretched in a way that made her mind linger on each note, searching for patterns or inconsistencies that might otherwise be overlooked. Even the most ordinary sounds, she reminded herself, could carry secrets if one listened carefully enough. Passing the hall, she overheard murmured comments from small clusters of villagers. "Did you hear that?" one whispered, a tinge of unease in her voice. "It's much longer than usual," replied another, glancing toward the radio set in the corner, its dial glowing warmly. Miss Marple tilted her head ever so slightly, noting who spoke, how they spoke, and what remained unsaid. Villagers exchanged quiet speculations, yet none seemed willing to confront the anomaly directly. That hesitation, gentle as it was, offered Miss Marple more insight than any direct statement could. Subtle hesitation often revealed more than words themselves. Continuing her walk, she caught sight of a figure moving near the lamp-posts, too deliberate to be idle, yet careful not to draw attention. She made a mental note of the posture, the soft shuffle of boots against the cobbled stones, and the faint sound of breath mingling with the crisp evening air. The background murmurs of the broadcast, familiar to every listener, carried a faint undertone she had not noticed before, a voice, almost imperceptible, threading in and out like a shadow between the notes, a momentary hesitation in a line of music, a breath misplaced, and a whisper that seemed to vanish when she focused too directly. These were the small oddities that piqued her curiosity most. By the village fountain, a group of friends gathered to discuss the music, each offering their version of what they thought they heard. A subtle disagreement emerged. One recalled the melody as smooth and uninterrupted, another insisted it had a strange interruption, and a third hesitated, unsure what to believe. Miss Marple observed quietly, sensing the invisible web forming between these recollections and the faint irregularities in the broadcast. Patterns often revealed themselves in such contradictions, she thought, patterns that could illuminate motives or intentions if only one paid close attention. She paused to consider the absent faces she had noticed earlier, including Mrs. Fletcher's. Their absence, combined with the unusual elements in the broadcast, hinted at connections yet to be revealed. Each anomaly, minor as it seemed, layered the scene with gentle intrigue, drawing Miss Marple deeper into her private investigation. In these quiet observations, she felt the thrill of discovery, not dramatic or frightening, but the soft, steady curiosity that promised understanding through patience and careful attention. Even the wind carried its own whispers that night, rustling through holly branches and sending a light shiver across her coat. It seemed to mingle with the music, the murmured conversations, and the irregular footsteps to form a puzzle only she could sense. She allowed herself a small smile, appreciating the delicate interplay between ordinary village life and the subtle irregularities hinting at something more. Each step, each note, each glance was a piece of the larger picture waiting to unfold. By the time she returned home, the shadows were longer, and the gentle glow of the lanterns seemed to accentuate rather than diminish the mystery lingering in the evening air. Miss Marple settled into her chair with a cup of tea, reviewing the evening's subtle observations. The anomalies were small, but they were enough. In a village where nothing went unnoticed by keen eyes, even the simplest sounds could hold the weight of secrets, waiting for patience and attention to uncover them. She leaned back, her mind already tracing connections, anticipating the quiet unraveling of events that the night would bring. Every gentle oddity, every whisper, every flicker of light seemed to beckon her forward, promising that the true story behind the broadcast was only just beginning to reveal itself. Chapter 2. A Whisper Behind the Music. The village hall of St. Mary Mead was a warm, bustling haven, its wooden floors polished to a soft sheen, and the scent of evergreen and baked goods mingling in the air. Lanterns flickered across the room, casting gentle shadows on the walls lined with holly garlands. Miss Marple entered quietly, allowing her eyes to roam across familiar faces, each alight with festive cheer. Yet beneath the glow of celebration, there was a subtle tension she could feel, an undercurrent running through the conversations that hinted at more than holiday excitement. It was a sensation she had come to recognize over the years, one that suggested the smallest words could carry unexpected weight. Clusters of villagers spoke in hushed tones near the punch bowl, voices low but urgent enough for attentive ears to catch fragments. One woman, knitting swiftly with needles clinking like soft chimes, remarked on the broadcast continuing well past its usual end. "It's as if someone doesn't want it to stop," she murmured, glancing toward the radio in the corner. Nearby, a gentleman adjusted his scarf and offered a knowing nod. "Perhaps old rivalries are surfacing again," he suggested, a subtle hint of amusement and unease tracing his words. Miss Marple noted the interplay of tone and hesitation, recognizing that even casual remarks could conceal histories both light and shadowed. Across the room, children lingered near the fireplace, curious yet quiet, and their innocence offered a contrast to the more complex adult dialogues. Miss Marple drifted among the groups, her ears catching snippets that spoke of forgotten grudges, disagreements over property lines, and a playful dispute from years past about who had won the village carol contest. Each anecdote was layered with personal pride and gentle tension, a reminder that even in a small, close-knit community, old stories never truly vanished. They simply waited to be recalled. A sudden laugh, bright and melodic, broke through the murmurs, yet it carried an edge of nervousness. A neighbor recalled a broadcast from 2 years prior, one that had ended with a peculiar message hidden between the songs. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed subtly, noting the careful way in which the villagers avoided lingering on the topic, yet couldn't resist referencing it in passing. Patterns, she thought, often revealed themselves not in what was spoken plainly, but in the pauses, the fleeting glances, and the nearly whispered confessions tucked between jokes. As the evening progressed, the warmth of the room did little to dull the quiet curiosity threading through her mind. Miss Marple observed the careful choreography of conversation, noting how certain villagers positioned themselves to overhear or avoid remarks. Every word, every glance, every slight hesitation became a clue, a hint of motives or memories that might otherwise remain unnoticed. While the laughter and music maintained a sense of festive comfort, the delicate web of whispered truths gave the night a gentle tension, a mystery tucked neatly within the cheerful celebration. By the time the clock chimed softly, signaling the late hour, Miss Marple had accumulated a small collection of these subtle observations. The conversations, though outwardly ordinary, hinted at patterns, past grievances, and the quiet unease that a long-running, inexplicably persistent broadcast could provoke. Every whispered remark, she realized, might matter more than anyone imagined, and every fleeting glance could conceal an untold story. With a polite nod to neighbors and a quiet smile, she left the warmth of the hall, the echoes of half-heard words and hidden rivalries lingering gently in her mind as she stepped into the crisp evening air. Back in the quiet of her sitting room, Miss Marple settled into her favorite armchair, the soft firelight painting her notes in a gentle glow. The village was asleep, or at least most of it, yet the lingering echoes of the evening's conversations and the persistent broadcast hummed softly in her mind. She poured herself a cup of tea, the warmth seeping into her hands, and opened the small notebook she carried everywhere. Tonight, each observation, each half-heard remark, seemed to demand careful attention, for sometimes the most ordinary words hid extraordinary secrets. She began reviewing the transcript of the broadcast, written meticulously as it played through her own small recorder. At first glance it seemed ordinary. Cheerful music, light-hearted stories, and the familiar voices of villagers she had long known. Yet, as she read, her sharp eyes caught subtle repetitions, phrases that appeared at unexpected intervals, almost as if deliberately placed. A simple greeting was repeated twice in succession, a jingle ended with an odd emphasis, and one anecdote seemed slightly altered from its previous telling. The anomalies were small, gentle enough to be dismissed, yet they persisted. Miss Marple leaned closer to the pages, tracing the lines with her finger, noting where the words had shifted, where a pause lingered longer than expected. She thought of the villagers' hushed conversations at the party, how each person had recalled a slightly different version of events, and how those discrepancies mirrored the subtle irregularities in the broadcast. Patterns, she mused, were often revealed in repetition, in the faint echoes of what was said and what was left unspoken. Even the smallest change could carry significance, hinting at intentions, secrets, or messages meant for only the most observant listener. Outside, the wind stirred the bare branches, sending a soft rustling against the window panes, blending seamlessly with the faint hum of the broadcast still audible from the distant radio. Miss Marple sipped her tea, letting her thoughts trace connections between the notes, the phrases, and the conversations she had overheard. There was no urgency, no danger, only the gentle thrill of unraveling a puzzle at her own measured pace. Each discovery brought a quiet satisfaction, as though the village itself whispered its secrets to those who cared to listen carefully. She made careful notes in the margins, marking repetitions and unusual wordings, sketching tiny diagrams that linked phrases to people, places, and previous Christmases. It was a delicate, patient process, one that required both attention and imagination. Miss Marple reflected that sometimes a hidden message wasn't bold or dramatic. It was subtle, woven into the familiar, so that only those attuned to the rhythms of life might perceive it. This approach, she knew, was often more revealing than overt declarations, for human nature tended to conceal truth within routine and repetition. By the time the tea had cooled, Miss Marple felt a quiet confidence settling over her. The broadcast, which at first seemed merely peculiar, was beginning to yield a pattern, a structure hinting at a message or intention that had eluded everyone else. She smiled softly to herself, appreciating the gentle interplay of music, speech, and timing, and the way ordinary words could, when carefully observed, reveal extraordinary insights. In the calm of her sitting room, she allowed the puzzle to unfold at its own pace, knowing that patience, attention, and quiet curiosity would guide her to the heart of the mystery. With the fire crackling gently and her notes spread around her, Miss Marple leaned back, feeling a sense of purpose and anticipation. Tomorrow would bring further observations, new interactions, and perhaps more clues hidden in the familiar broadcast. But for now, in this quiet, reflective moment, she allowed herself to savor the subtle thrill of discovery, knowing that even the smallest anomaly could illuminate a larger truth. if only one listened with care and curiosity. Chapter 3. The Missing Villager. The morning light filtered softly through the frost-laced windows of St. Mary Mead, casting a pale glow over the quiet streets. Miss Marple stepped outside, her coat buttoned neatly against the crisp air, and immediately sensed a subtle shift in the familiar rhythm of the village. Though the decorations and gentle chatter remained, there was a small absence she could not ignore. Mrs. Fletcher, a stalwart presence in every Christmas Eve gathering and the annual broadcast, was nowhere to be seen. Her familiar warm smile, the way she lingered by the radio with a cup of tea, had always been a comforting constant, and now there was only emptiness where her presence should have been. Miss Marple paused near the square, letting her gaze wander across the cobblestones and the snow-dusted benches. The other villagers were gathered in small clusters, murmuring quietly, though none seemed to dwell on the absence directly. A few glanced toward her with subtle concern, others exchanged hurried looks as if hesitant to speak aloud. Even in the warmest villages, she reflected, someone could quietly disappear without notice, leaving only faint traces for those paying attention. She noted the footprints in the frost, some fresh, some fading, and wondered if they could offer a clue about Mrs. Fletcher's movements. Her observations led her past the fountain and toward the bookshop, where Mr. Pennyworth adjusted the wreath on his door and commented casually about the unusual continuation of the broadcast from the night before. Yet, when she mentioned Mrs. Fletcher, his brow furrowed briefly before he forced a polite smile. "She's probably visiting relatives," he suggested, though the hesitancy in his tone caught Miss Marple's attention. Subtle cues like this rarely went unnoticed by her. A slight pause, a shift in gaze, the almost imperceptible tightening of a hand, all suggested more than a casual absence. Miss Marple continued her walk, quietly inquiring with neighbours who had known Mrs. Fletcher the longest. Everyone reported minor irregularities. The neighbours' lights had stayed dim longer than usual. The mail had not been collected, and a small scarf, usually left draped over a chair by the fire, remained untouched. Each detail, small and seemingly mundane, hinted at a departure that was unusual in its quietness. The gentle rhythms of village life had been disrupted, not by noise or drama, but by something far more subtle, an unspoken departure leaving an invisible echo in its wake. Mid-morning, Miss Marple had assembled a mental map of the village and Mrs. Fletcher's typical routines. There were no signs of forced entry, no hastily abandoned belongings, only the soft, deliberate absence of a life usually entwined with every street and hearth. It was this very subtlety that made her curiosity stir more insistently. Absences, she reflected, often spoke louder than presence. The stillness, the missing footsteps, and the soft, unanswered questions carried their own weight. As she retraced the path Mrs. Fletcher might have taken the previous evening, Miss Marple noticed the quiet ways in which the village responded to the anomaly. Conversations dwindled when her name arose, children glanced curiously at the empty windows, and even the broadcast, now faint in the distance, seemed to echo her absence. Each observation added to the mystery, layering gentle intrigue over the familiar coziness of the village. The warmth remained, yes, but beneath it lay the compelling question. Where had Mrs. Fletcher gone, and why had she vanished so quietly, leaving only subtle hints for the keenest observer to follow? Miss Marple returned home as the sun climbed higher, settling in her chair with a notebook open on her lap. Her mind traced every step, every glance, and every half-heard remark from the morning, weaving a tapestry of possibilities. In the quiet, familiar village, the smallest absence could unfold into a story worth uncovering, and Miss Marple was determined to notice every clue hidden in plain sight. Once settled in her sitting room, Miss Marple spread her notes across the small wooden table, allowing the morning sun to illuminate the fine lines of her careful observations. Each detail from the previous evening and the morning's discovery of Mrs. Fletcher's absence seemed to pulse quietly on the page, waiting to be connected. She traced a finger along the handwritten lines, recalling the subtle oddities she had noticed in the broadcast, the repeated phrases, the elongated musical notes, and that faint, almost imperceptible voice threading between songs. Tonight, she would consider them not as isolated curiosities, but as threads that might tie directly to the missing villager. Her mind sifted through every conversation she had overheard at the Christmas party. Certain remarks that had seemed casual or humorous now carried a weight she had not fully appreciated at the time. A neighbour's quiet comment about a long-ago disagreement, the hesitant recollection of a forgotten carol contest, and the barely noticeable pause when Mrs. Fletcher's name arose, all suggested subtle connections between past events and the present anomaly. Miss Marple noted these with meticulous care, sketching a small diagram that linked each comment to a potential clue, all while preserving the warmth and rhythm of the day. Revisiting the broadcast in her mind, she focused on the recurring phrases that had first drawn her attention. Each repetition now seemed deliberate, like a soft Morse code embedded in familiar melodies. Some phrases coincided with moments where Mrs. Fletcher's absence could have been inferred, while others appeared to hint at unresolved matters from prior Christmases. Miss Marple reflected on how the smallest irregularities could reveal intentions or messages, often more clearly than direct statements. Her gentle analysis revealed a pattern forming, one that might illuminate not only the reason for the broadcast's unusual duration, but also why the beloved villager had gone missing so quietly. She paused to consider the village itself, the ebb and flow of human behavior that repeated year after year. Every resident had their quirks, their habits, and their hidden memories. By observing small deviations from the ordinary, missed greetings, lingering glances, or a carefully adjusted scarf, Miss Marple could reconstruct the subtle narrative woven into the day's events. The puzzle was not dramatic, no sudden danger threatened anyone, yet it demanded attention, curiosity, and patience, qualities she possessed in abundance. Miss Marple's fingers tapped lightly against the edge of her notebook as she connected the anomalies, the absent neighbour, the faint voice in the broadcast, and the whispered hints of old rivalries. Each thread wove into the next, forming a tapestry of intrigue that was as delicate as it was revealing. She reflected on the skill required to see these connections, to note the unspoken links and the patterns hidden within ordinary behavior. In a village where every action, no matter how small, could carry meaning, the missing villager became not just a concern, but a central clue, a key to understanding the subtle messages unfolding around her. By late afternoon, Miss Marple had reconstructed the likely sequence of events, tracing Mrs. Fletcher's movements, the peculiarities in the broadcast, and the village's reactions into a coherent narrative. Her mind, calm and deliberate, worked like a gentle tide, revealing patterns that would remain invisible to anyone less attentive. The pieces of the puzzle, quiet observations, repeated phrases, whispered conversations, fit together softly but convincingly. She allowed herself a small, satisfied smile, aware that each unremarkable detail could illuminate a larger truth. In the gentle rhythm of village life, the smallest anomaly often held the key to discovery, and Miss Marple was more than ready to follow it wherever it led. Chapter 4. Shadows of the Past. The afternoon sun filtered gently through the frosted windows of St. Mary Mead, casting a golden haze over the village streets as Miss Marple made her way toward the oldest homes, where the long-time residents held stories etched deep into memory. Each step along the cobblestones seemed to echo softly, carrying the faint scent of pine and wood smoke. The warmth of the holiday decorations contrasted with the weight of history she carried in her mind, reminding her that every village, no matter how serene, harboured secrets it hoped were forgotten. Her first stop was at Mrs. Ashcombe's cottage, a low, ivy-covered house that had stood for generations. The door opened before she could knock, and the elderly woman ushered her inside with a practised warmth. Over steaming cups of tea, the conversation turned to past Christmases, the the quiet rivalries between families, the disagreements over who had won the village carol contest years ago, and the gentle squabbles over property lines. Each anecdote seemed innocent enough, but Miss Marple listened closely, noticing small shifts in tone, lingering hesitations, and glances that suggested stories were told carefully, leaving out just enough to invite curiosity. From there, she wandered to the small square where the old clock tower stood. Villagers passing by exchanged friendly greetings, but Miss Marple's attention was drawn to the subtle undercurrents in their conversations. A comment about the annual broadcast, a fleeting mention of a forgotten holiday mishap, even a quiet laugh that masked discomfort, all suggested connections she needed to follow. It became clear that while these tales were shared lightly, they carried echoes of long-standing feelings, old grievances, and memories that still influenced present behavior. Next, she visited Mr. and Mrs. Crittenden, long-time residents, known for their meticulous record-keeping and love of storytelling. In the soft glow of their sitting room, Miss Marple carefully inquired about previous broadcasts and village events. The couple recounted moments that had seemed trivial at the time, a misplaced gift, a misremembered anecdote, a fleeting disagreement over decorations. But, in the careful way the Crittendens spoke, Miss Marple discerned patterns, small clues about motivations, and subtle alliances. What seemed like simple nostalgia now revealed itself as a gentle roadmap to understanding the village's hidden dynamics. As she walked home along the snow-lined lane, Miss Marple reflected on the wealth of history held in the quiet corners of the village. Each home she had visited contained whispers of past incidents, tiny echoes of grudges and friendships that had lingered across years, subtly shaping the present. Even the calm, comforting atmosphere of Christmas Eve could not entirely mask the influence of these old stories. The warmth of the decorations and the soft chiming of bells blended with these undercurrents, creating a gentle tension, curiosity wrapped in comfort, inviting her and the attentive listener to piece together the unseen threads connecting past and present. In the quiet of the early evening she paused by the lamp-lit fountain, letting the serenity of the village wash over her. She understood now that every familiar street and every cheerful face held memories and motives layered just beneath the surface. The village's history was alive in the present, influencing the smallest interactions, the quietest gestures, and the subtle hints embedded in conversation. Every village, Miss Marple mused, might hope to forget its secrets, yet they always shaped each Christmas night, like shadows resting gently among the lights. Back in her cosy sitting room, Miss Marple settled near the fire, spreading her notes and sketches across the table. The soft flicker of flames cast gentle shadows on the walls, making the room feel alive yet calm. Her eyes wandered over the collected observations, letters left carelessly on mantels, decorations arranged with unusual precision, and the faint anomalies in the broadcast that had first caught her attention. She knew that some messages were meant to be hidden in plain sight, subtle enough to elude most, but deliberate enough that a careful observer could discern meaning. She began with the letters she had seen during her village visits. Written in flowing handwriting, the notes seemed ordinary, holiday greetings, small favors, and friendly reminders. Yet Miss Marple noticed tiny irregularities, a word underlined twice, a date slightly off, and a greeting repeated in an unusual pattern. Each small detail, she realized, might be a code of sorts, a gentle nudge or hint left for those attuned to the rhythm of the village's life. In her mind, she traced the connections between the letters and the earlier whispers she had overheard, the absent glances and the hushed mentions of forgotten rivalries. Next, she examined the decorations. Wreaths hung with subtle asymmetry, lights strung in precise sequences, and holly placed with deliberate attention. While most villagers would see only charm and festivity, Miss Marple's trained eyes discerned patterns, Certain ornaments were repeated in odd locations, their placement corresponding to phrases she had heard in the broadcast. Tiny, seemingly inconsequential details, the tilt of a ribbon or the orientation of a candle, hinted at deliberate intent, a gentle message hidden within the season's cheer. She jotted down each observation, mentally linking it to the previous anomalies she had noted in conversations and recordings. Turning her attention to the broadcast itself, Miss Marple replayed the subtle interruptions she had marked. The music lingered a fraction longer than expected. A voice appeared almost imperceptibly behind the familiar songs, and the familiar greetings arrived in slightly altered sequences. Each deviation, minor though it seemed, could not be dismissed. She imagined the careful mind behind it, a person orchestrating these small irregularities, confident that only the most attentive listener would detect the pattern. It was a game of observation and patience, and she relished the gentle challenge. As she pieced together these layers, a quiet thrill ran through her. The subtle hints, once isolated, began forming a network of possibility. Letters aligned with whispered comments, decorations echoed phrases in the broadcast, and minor oddities in routines now seemed to have purpose. The patterns were not overt, not meant to alarm or startle, but to communicate quietly, inviting her to decipher them. Miss Marple's mind traced each connection, imagining the hands, the intentions, and the gentle amusement of whoever had hidden these messages in plain sight. By evening, she leaned back, sipping her tea and reflecting on the tapestry of clues before her. There was satisfaction in the methodical uncovering of meaning, a calm pleasure in tracing patterns that others might overlook. Each hidden message carried promise, guiding her toward understanding and weaving the cozy mystery of St. Mary Mead into a rich, layered narrative. For the attentive listener, the gentle unfolding of these secrets offered not only curiosity, but the comfort of observing a puzzle solved with care and patience. Miss Marple allowed herself a small smile, confident that the thread she had begun to unravel would eventually converge. The village, so serene and bright on the surface, held depths waiting to be discovered, and she was determined to notice every subtle hint, every carefully placed irregularity, every whispered clue, long before anyone else would. Chapter 5. The Midnight Revelation. The village lay quiet under a soft blanket of snow, the streets illuminated by the warm, golden glow of lanterns and the occasional flicker of distant windows. Miss Marple moved carefully along the edge of the town square, her footsteps muffled by the fresh powder beneath her boots. Something about the night felt different, a faint tension that whispered beneath the usual tranquility. She had ventured out to check the radio station, curious about the unusual continuation of the broadcast and the faint anomalies she had noted earlier. Even in the quietest night, a single shadow could reveal everything you needed to know. Near the station, she noticed a figure standing just beyond the lamplight, partially hidden by the corner of a building. The person's posture was deliberate, measured, and cautious, yet the mere presence suggested that they were not entirely at ease. Miss Marple paused, observing quietly, letting the night absorb her presence as she watched the stranger. Every movement, the tilt of the head, the shift of weight from one foot to another, the subtle glance toward the radio, spoke volumes without a word being uttered. She did not startle them. She simply waited, patient and calm, allowing observation to guide her understanding. The stranger shifted slightly, and Miss Marple noticed the careful attention to the surrounding shadows. Whoever it was had reason to linger here, though not for mischief or malice, she thought. Their behavior suggested curiosity or perhaps concern rather than intent to harm. She took note of small details, the muffled sound of hurried footsteps in the distance, the rustle of a coat against the cold wind, and the faint glow reflecting from what appeared to be a notebook clutched in one hand. Each subtle cue hinted at purpose, and Miss Marple's mind quietly catalogued them, forming a profile without needing to approach. When the figure finally spoke, Their voice was low, careful, almost hesitant. "I didn't think anyone would notice," they admitted, glancing at her with a mixture of surprise and relief. Miss Marple responded softly, her tone steady and unjudging, asking a question in a way that encouraged conversation rather than confrontation. The stranger hesitated, then offered information about the irregularities in the broadcast, revealing snippets that hinted at motives rather than secrets themselves. Miss Marple listened closely, noting inconsistencies in phrasing, pauses, and the rhythm of the speech, tiny details that painted a clearer picture than any direct answer could. As they spoke, the night deepened and the snow muffled the outside world, creating a cocoon of quiet observation. Miss Marple realized that the figure was familiar, someone tied to past village events, though the connection was subtle and not yet fully revealed. Their cautious approach, the way they moved, and the careful choice of words all indicated intent that was not malicious, but protective, almost secretive. In this gentle encounter, she found a quiet thrill, not of danger, but of discovery. By the time the conversation ended, the shadow had receded, leaving Miss Marple alone under the soft lantern light. Yet the information gleaned, the careful attention paid to movements, glances, and phrasing had provided her with a valuable insight. A single encounter, observed without rush or alarm, had revealed more than hours of speculation might have achieved. She made her way back along the snow-lined streets, notebook in hand, quietly piecing together the subtleties of the night, confident that each shadow, each whispered movement, was a piece of the larger story waiting to unfold. Back in the comforting warmth of her sitting room, Miss Marple set down her coat and brushed a light trace of snow from her shoulders. The encounter at the radio station lingered in her mind, the careful posture, the hesitant words, the subtle hints that suggested someone was trying to communicate without drawing attention. She poured herself a cup of tea, letting the steam curl slowly in the firelit air, and turned her attention to her notes. Tonight, the first piece of the puzzle might finally fit, though the full picture was still elusive. She spread out the transcribed lines from the broadcast, the letters and the annotations she had made over the past days. Certain phrases, repeated in unusual sequences, now began to reveal a pattern she had not noticed before. A seemingly insignificant greeting, when matched with the timing of a musical pause, aligned with a phrase overheard in conversation at the village party. Slowly, carefully, the pieces fell into place. The broadcast was not random, nor was it merely extended for entertainment. It carried intention, a quiet message designed to be noticed by those with a keen ear and patient observation. Miss Marple leaned closer to the table, tracing the lines with her finger as if following a delicate thread through a tapestry. One minor discrepancy, a note that lingered too long, a word that repeated unexpectedly, suddenly made sense in the context of her observations. It pointed toward Mrs. Fletcher's absence and suggested that the unusual continuation of the broadcast had been orchestrated to convey information to someone paying attention, just as she had been. The thrill was subtle but undeniable, the first real confirmation that her careful scrutiny was revealing truths hidden in plain sight. Her thoughts returned to the evening's whispered conversations at the party, the glances and half-statements that had seemed inconsequential at the time. Each remark now linked naturally to a phrase in the broadcast, forming a chain of clues that led to a small but satisfying revelation. A question she had pondered for days, why the musical pieces lingered, and why certain voices seemed to appear behind the familiar broadcast, found its gentle answer. It was not a grand exposé or a dramatic confrontation, but a quiet, elegant resolution of a minor mystery, a sort of delicate unfolding that brought a soft smile to her lips. Satisfied with this small breakthrough, Miss Marple carefully recorded her findings, connecting phrases, gestures, and overheard words in a way that felt almost meditative. The room was quiet except for the gentle crackle of the fire and the process of noticing, linking, and understanding brought a comforting rhythm to the evening. For the attentive listener, following these patterns alongside her provided a calm, mental exercise, a gentle puzzle that rewarded patience without urgency or alarm. By the time she set down her pen, the first piece of the hidden message had been successfully deciphered. Confidence, soft but steady, settled in her mind, reinforcing the belief that careful observation and thoughtful attention could uncover even the most subtle secrets. The remaining questions lingered, hints of greater revelations yet to come, but this early success provided both reassurance and anticipation. She allowed herself a moment to enjoy the quiet thrill, the satisfaction of linking clues, the gentle promise that the larger mystery, though still veiled, was within reach. Miss Marple leaned back, sipping her tea and reflecting on the evening's discoveries. The night had offered her more than a mere encounter. It had confirmed that patience, attentiveness, and the quiet art of observation could illuminate truths hidden within the ordinary. The first piece of the puzzle fit, and though the complete picture remained elusive, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow she would follow the threads further, continuing her gentle unraveling of the broadcast's mysteries and the village's quiet secrets. Chapter 6. Tensions Among Friends. The village library was bathed in the warm glow of lanterns, the wooden shelves lined with volumes that smelled faintly of old paper and polished oak. Miss Marple entered quietly, greeted by the familiar hush of a space devoted to thought and reflection. Villagers had gathered for a small holiday reading, their voices mingling softly as they shared stories and reminisced about past Christmases. Yet beneath the cheerful chatter, Miss Marple noticed a subtle undercurrent. Each person remembered certain events slightly differently, and those discrepancies offered a gentle puzzle she was eager to examine. Mrs. Ashcombe recounted the previous year's broadcast with confidence, emphasizing a long musical piece that had ended abruptly. Mr. Pennyworth remembered it differently, insisting that the same piece had lingered for nearly double the usual length. A young teacher mentioned a phrase that had repeated while the organist at the church recalled no such repetition. Miss Marple listened carefully, her keen mind noting not just the stories themselves, but the way each person phrased their recollections, the pauses between words, and the subtle hesitations that accompanied uncertainty. As the conversation unfolded, she realized that memory, even in the calmest village, was a curious thing. People remembered details not only as they had occurred, but also as their emotions and expectations colored their perceptions. Each version of events offered both a clue and a distraction, requiring careful discernment. Miss Marple quietly compared these accounts to her own observations, the notes she had taken, and the irregularities she had detected in the broadcast. Differences that seemed minor at first now appeared significant, like the gentle ripples of a pond, revealing currents beneath the surface. The warmth of the room and the holiday decorations created an atmosphere of comfort, softening any tension while allowing subtle mysteries to emerge. Villagers sipped tea and nibbled cookies, their friendly smiles concealing tiny uncertainties. Miss Marple engaged gently, asking questions that encouraged elaboration without confrontation. Each story she heard provided a thread, some frayed or tangled, but all potentially leading to insight. Even the smallest detail, a forgotten greeting, a misremembered line in a song, was noted carefully, stored in her mind alongside prior observations. By the time the evening progressed, she had begun to map the conflicting accounts onto a pattern of possibilities. One version of events suggested a particular sequence in the broadcast. Another hinted at motives among the villagers, yet another seemed merely a reflection of personal perception. Miss Marple recognized that truth often emerged not from a single account, but from understanding how different perspectives interacted. The cozy setting, the gentle hum of conversation, and the flickering lantern light created a safe environment for these revelations to surface naturally. As she prepared to leave the library, Miss Marple reflected on the nature of memory and perception. The discrepancies she had witnessed were not errors or deception. They were human, charming, and revealing. Each villager contributed a piece of the puzzle, and only by listening attentively and patiently could she begin to discern which pieces fit together. In a village as small and familiar as St. Mary Mead, even minor differences in recollection could illuminate subtle truths, and tonight, the careful unraveling of these conflicting stories promised to bring her one step closer to understanding the mysteries quietly unfolding around her. After leaving the library, Miss Marple made her way to the small parlour of the village hall, where a handful of villagers had gathered for a quiet evening of games and conversation. The fire crackled gently, casting a warm glow over the faces she knew so well. The cheerful comfort of the setting did little to diminish the subtle tensions that had begun to emerge. Miss Marple moved among the groups with her customary calm, noting the tiny signs of unease, a slight stiffening of posture, a lingering glance exchanged between two neighbours, the faint hesitation before answering a question. Sometimes the quietest confrontations reveal the loudest truths. She began her inquiries gently, asking about the previous day's broadcast and the unusual continuation of the music. Responses were careful, measured, and polite, but contradictions emerged almost immediately. One neighbour insisted that Mrs. Fletcher had been planning to leave the village early. Another claimed she had been seen lingering by the radio station, speaking to no one in particular. Miss Marple observed their body language as intently as their words, a hand clutched to a coat, a sudden shift in eye contact, a deliberate pause before answering. Each subtle reaction added nuance to her understanding, revealing more than the spoken words alone. A group discussing the festive decorations provided further insight. One villager recounted a disagreement about wreath placements, while another insisted no disagreement had occurred. The contrast was gentle but pointed, and Miss Marple noticed how each person's tone carried an unspoken history. She asked clarifying questions in a soft, conversational manner, never pressing too hard, allowing the villagers to reveal more through their natural hesitations and corrections. Each revelation, though small, added a layer to the growing tapestry of understanding, and Miss Marple's keen mind catalogued every detail. Even as the evening remained cosy and warm, subtle currents of suspicion and curiosity surfaced. Miss Marple's approach was not to accuse, but to observe, letting the villagers' own words and gestures uncover hidden connections. A soft chuckle, a careful rephrasing, or a sudden withdrawal from a conversation spoke volumes. She noted patterns, who seemed genuinely unaware of certain details, who stumbled over familiar phrases, and who instinctively deflected questions. The quiet confrontations unfolded gently, like ripples across the still waters of the parlour, revealing truths in their own measured time. By the time the night deepened, Miss Marple had begun to see how the pieces fit together. The discrepancies in memory, the cautious corrections, and the subtle hints provided a map of relationships, motives, and intentions. She could sense how long-held rivalries, minor grievances, and carefully maintained appearances intersected to shape the current mystery. Observing quietly, listening attentively, and noting even the smallest gestures allowed her to uncover truths that might otherwise remain hidden, all while maintaining the comforting atmosphere of a village evening. As she prepared to leave the hall, Miss Marple reflected on the power of gentle observation. Confrontations did not need to be loud or dramatic to reveal what mattered. Sometimes a slight glance, a softly spoken correction, or a hesitant answer could illuminate more than any confession. The warmth of the room, the familiar faces, and the cozy holiday environment made these subtle truths accessible, allowing her to piece together the larger story, one careful observation at a time. Tonight had reinforced the importance of patience, attention, and quiet reflection, drawing her ever closer to understanding the intricate web of village life and the mysteries quietly unfolding within it. Chapter 7. Secrets Unfold. The early morning sun cast a soft golden light across St. Mary Mead, illuminating the familiar streets and warmly decorated homes. Miss Marple, notebook in hand, strolled through the quiet village, reflecting on the clues she had gathered over the past days. Each observation, conversation, and subtle anomaly now began to interweave, forming a delicate web of connections that had previously been invisible. It was remarkable how the ordinary rhythms of village life could conceal such intricacies. Each small thread, once untangled, revealed a pattern no one expected. She began with the broadcast itself, recalling the repeated phrases, the faint background voices, and the unusual musical sequences. These anomalies had seemed minor in isolation, but in light of her recent investigations, they aligned neatly with specific villages and events from past Christmases. Miss Marple noted that certain phrases corresponded to forgotten rivalries, while the lingering notes echoed conversations that had once taken place near the church and the library. Even seemingly trivial observations, such as the precise placement of holly or the timing of a greeting, now took on significance, as if the village had encoded its stories in the fabric of everyday life. Walking past the town square, she reflected on the villagers she had spoken to and the subtle contradictions she had recorded. Mrs. Ashcombe's recollections, the young teacher's observations, and the slight hesitations of Mr. Pennyworth all fell into place within this emerging network of connections. It was not a matter of assigning blame, but of understanding the patterns, who knew what, who observed what, and who had reasons to influence the broadcast, however subtly. Each person's memories, gestures, and interactions were pieces of the same puzzle, waiting to be arranged with care. Miss Marple paused by the fountain, tracing the relationships in her mind. She saw how past events, old disagreements over village contests, forgotten favours, and minor disputes linked naturally to present behaviours. The absent villager, the repeated broadcast phrases, and the quiet observations all coalesced into a coherent story. It was a gentle unfolding, a narrative that respected the warmth of the village while illuminating the mysteries that lay beneath. No one had acted with malice. Rather, human curiosity and playful mischief had subtly shaped the anomalies she had noticed. She returned to her sitting room, spreading her notes across the table once more. Maps of the village, timelines of conversations, and sketches of decorations revealed the final connections. A glance at a particular window aligned with a repeated phrase, and a long-forgotten disagreement explained a hesitation in someone's voice. Miss Marple smiled softly, appreciating the elegance of it all. The threads she had carefully followed were no longer isolated strands. They formed a complete, understandable pattern, gentle yet compelling, offering clarity without drama. By mid-morning, Miss Marple could see the village's hidden story unfold like a tapestry. The broadcast anomalies were not chaotic. They were deliberate, playful, and rooted in the interactions and memories of the villagers themselves. Each observation she had made, each small contradiction, had its place in this larger, warm, and intricate design. In the quiet comfort of her own home, she felt the satisfying clarity of understanding emerge. The village, for all its calm and familiarity, had whispered its secrets to the attentive listener, revealing the harmony hidden beneath the playful complexity of human behavior. As the afternoon light softened through the frosted windows of her sitting room, Miss Marple settled once more with her notes and sketches spread carefully before her. The threads of observations, conversations, and subtle anomalies had formed a coherent pattern, each detail now pointing gently toward a single source. The truth, she realized, was seldom loud. Sometimes it whispers, and only the attentive hear it. Tonight, she would finally uncover the person behind the broadcast's unusual continuation. Reflecting on the sequence of events, Miss Marple reviewed the faint background voice that had intrigued her, the musical phrases that lingered longer than expected, and the repeated greetings woven into the broadcast. Each irregularity corresponded to a behavior or habit of a particular villager, someone whose subtle presence had been almost imperceptible. Her analytical mind, patient and thorough, traced these connections carefully. The clues were never dramatic or obvious. They were embedded in gestures, timing, and a soft interplay of words and memory. She recalled the encounter near the radio station, the figure lingering in the shadows, cautious but deliberate. At the time, it had seemed mysterious, even a little unsettling, yet tonight it made perfect sense. The person had not been hiding out of malice or fear, but out of a quiet determination to communicate subtly with the village, using the broadcast as a playful, thoughtful means of conveying information. Miss Marple smiled softly, appreciating the cleverness and care that went into such a gentle deception. Turning her attention to the broader picture, she considered how old rivalries, forgotten contests, and minor grievances had influenced behavior. The culprit had orchestrated the anomalies with a light touch, never intending harm, only amusement and perhaps a little guidance. Miss Marple could now link each detail, the timing of the musical pieces, the deliberate placement of decorations, and the faint, almost hidden phrases in letters and conversations. They were all part of a coherent design, revealing not chaos, but a playful, human intelligence at work. With her deductions complete, Miss Marple prepared to address the villager in question. She chose a gentle approach, inviting conversation rather than confrontation. When the person arrived, curiosity evident in their eyes, she spoke with warmth, recounting her observations and the subtle connections she had made. The revelation came quietly, without accusation, yet with a satisfying clarity. The villager admitted to orchestrating the broadcast anomalies, explaining their motives, playful mischief, a love for the village, and a desire to engage those with a keen ear in a puzzle of gentle observation. Miss Marple listened, nodding, her expression calm and understanding. She reflected on the elegance of human creativity, the subtle ways people communicate, and the quiet joys of observation. There was no anger, no dramatic confrontation, only a gentle unveiling of cleverness, the satisfaction of a puzzle resolved, and the reaffirmation of trust within the community. The village, for all its familiar warmth, had revealed its secrets to the most attentive, offering both delight and understanding in equal measure. By evening, the mystery felt complete. Miss Marple had identified the source of the anomalies, deciphered the intention behind them, and, in doing so, deepened her appreciation for the intricate interplay of human behavior in St. Mary Mead. The warmth of the village returned fully, the gentle hum of conversation resuming with a subtle sparkle of shared amusement. For the attentive listener, the revelation provided emotional satisfaction, reinforcing confidence in Miss Marple's skills and the comforting rhythm of cozy mysteries. In St. Mary Mead, even the quietest whisper could illuminate a story, and tonight that story had finally been told. Chapter 8. Restoring Christmas Peace. The village hall, softly illuminated by the glow of lanterns and the twinkle of holiday decorations, felt particularly alive that evening. Villagers had gathered once again, this time not for a celebration of music or storytelling, but for the gentle resolution of the unusual events that had quietly stirred their curiosity. Miss Marple moved through the room with her usual calm, welcoming smiles and nods exchanged between friends and neighbors. Even the smallest mischiefs, once understood, can bring communities closer together. The villager responsible for the broadcast anomalies stepped forward, a mixture of relief and apprehension in their posture. They spoke quietly, recounting their intentions, a playful attempt to engage attentive listeners, to create a puzzle woven into the familiar rhythms of the Christmas broadcast, and to bring a sense of wonder to those who cared to notice. There was no harm intended, no malice, only the gentle curiosity and love for the village that had motivated their subtle orchestration. Reactions among the villagers varied at first: surprise, faint laughter, and a few incredulous glances, but these quickly gave way to understanding. A neighbor clasped the culprit's hand, while another shook their head in gentle amusement. Miss Marple observed carefully, noting the transformation of tension into warmth. The shared secret, once revealed, had a remarkable effect. It deepened bonds rather than undermined them. What had seemed unusual or even concerning became a charming anecdote for future holiday conversations, a testament to the community's resilience and good-natured spirit. As the villagers spoke with one another, recounting their own moments of observation and discovery, Miss Marple reflected on the nature of small communities. Tensions, misunderstandings, and minor rivalries were inevitable, she thought, but so too were forgiveness, curiosity, and empathy. Each person's actions, however puzzling at first glance, held meaning when seen in context. The warmth of the hall, the gentle hum of conversation, and the shared relief created an atmosphere of seasonal charm restored, proving that even subtle mischiefs could strengthen communal ties when met with patience and understanding. Miss Marple wandered among the groups, quietly offering her insights and acknowledging small observations that others might have overlooked. The combination of revelation, explanation, and gentle humor created a sense of closure without drama. The villagers, once caught in a web of minor confusion, now moved freely in the comforting embrace of friendship and holiday cheer. She allowed herself a small, satisfied smile, appreciating how curiosity, attentiveness, and kindness had combined to resolve a puzzle that had quietly unfolded over several days. By the end of the evening, peace had returned fully to St. Mary Mead. The once subtle tensions had softened into laughter and shared stories, the air filled with warmth and camaraderie. Miss Marple paused to observe a small group gathered around a decorated tree, their eyes bright with curiosity and delight. The community had faced the unknown together, navigated minor mysteries, and emerged with their connections stronger than before. In this gentle resolution, she recognized the simple yet profound truth that understanding and empathy could transform even the most puzzling circumstances into moments of shared joy. That evening, back in the comforting warmth of her sitting room, Miss Marple settled into her favourite armchair, the fire crackling softly before her. The glow of the flames danced across the walls, casting gentle shadows that mirrored the subtle mysteries of the village. Outside, snow lay undisturbed, covering rooftops and lanes in a soft, glimmering blanket, reflecting the calm quiet of St. Mary Mead, a village restored to peace. Some mysteries are meant to teach patience, attention, and compassion, especially at Christmas. She sipped her tea, letting the warmth spread through her hands and settle in her chest. The events of the past days unfolded in her mind like a gentle tapestry, whispered conversations, carefully placed decorations, lingering musical phrases, and the small, almost imperceptible actions of a single villager. Each thread had led to the next, forming a coherent story that revealed both playful mischief and deeper truths about human nature. Miss Marple smiled softly, appreciating the subtle joy of noticing what others might overlook and the quiet satisfaction of understanding. The village had offered lessons in attentiveness and empathy. Small actions could ripple through a community, sometimes unnoticed, yet capable of strengthening bonds or revealing hidden motives. Curiosity, paired with patience and kindness, illuminated truths without causing alarm or distress. Observing carefully was not merely a tool for solving puzzles, it was a gentle practice of recognizing intention, appreciating the humanity in others and finding meaning in everyday life. As she gazed into the fire, Miss Marple thought of the villagers who had shared their recollections, their hesitations, and their laughter. Each had contributed to the unfolding of the mystery, knowingly or not, part of a cooperative dance of memory, perception, and subtle communication. The gentle resolutions, the smiles, and the quiet understanding between neighbors spoke to the enduring warmth of the village, where curiosity and kindness walked hand in hand. Even in puzzling moments, the subtle tensions had been resolved, the minor mysteries explained, and the village's charm fully restored. There was comfort in this, a reassurance that even in quiet corners, thoughtful reflection could reveal truths without alarm. Small gestures, whispered words, or playful deviations could become sources of insight rather than frustration. reinforcing the value of quiet observation and empathetic understanding. As the fire dwindled to a soft glow, Miss Marple let out a contented sigh. The village, the people, and the gentle mysteries they carried were all part of a living tapestry woven from kind intentions and the subtle art of noticing. Night had settled over St. Mary Mead, and inside warmth and calm filled every home. What would you have noticed if you had walked the village streets tonight? Which small detail might have caught your eye, and what secrets could lie just beneath the surface? Sometimes the smallest observations reveal the most remarkable stories, if only we pay attention.